These are the Chronicles of Dominic Carter on 77 WABC.
Dominic Carter with you, Talk Radio 77 WABC. He's a major player in New York politics. Dennis Walcott served as a deputy mayor under Michael Bloomberg and as a schools chancellor for New York City. Mr. Walcott is currently the president and CEO of the Queens Library System. He says libraries are pivotal to New York's recovery. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Walcott.
And thank you, sir, for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
We will talk politics in just a minute, but I never thought about the possibility that libraries could play a role in New York's recovery. Explain how.
So when you think about libraries, you think about an institution that is open and free and the last truly open democratic institution. We don't ask anyone for their birth records, their history, their sexual persuasion, their religion, or anything, what country they come from, and we pride ourselves in that. So when you think about the library is in all corners of New York City, of course, and beyond. For example, in Queens, we like to say that every Queens resident lives within a mile to a mile and a half of a Queens public library. And so it's our responsibility to play a key role in the recovery. And we've done that a number of ways through having vaccine centers for the city, having testing sites for the city, continuing with our programs around job training and services, and having Wi-Fi connections for the public as well. And so while our buildings in the past may have been closed, our buildings are currently opening and open, and we provide grab-and-go services where people can order books and materials. They can have remote printing as well, and now they can come in and use the computer at a number of our libraries, and we continue to expand that service. So when you take a look at the role of recovery, both from a connectivity point of view as well as when you take a look at the services we provide, we're there in so many different ways. That's not the way I grew up with our libraries, and probably not the way you grew up with your libraries.
Let's talk politics, and we'll come back to the public library system in just a minute. Citywide elections are taking place, the primary elections this coming Tuesday, June 22nd. As the head of the Queens Library System, obviously you're not going to publicly endorse right here and right now. But what do you want to see, Mr. Walcott, as someone that has been in the political system? What do you want to see from the next mayor?
Well, I think a couple of things before we jump to that. The maximum role of the public in voting. And I think the opportunity there is tremendous as far as early voting is concerned. I've already voted. My wife and I have voted early. And we, through the libraries, we have one of our branches that serves as an early voting site, and also 13 that will be polling places on the 22nd of June. So we are positioned to help out as far as making sure our buildings are available for people to come and exercise their civic duty. In addition to that, we've been conducting a lot of training around ranked choice voting and what it means. I've interviewed a number of people. Our staff have been out talking about ranked choice voting. And I say that because, to me, the more we're empowered to come out and vote, the more accountability that I think is vested with the mayor to listen to her or his constituents as far as what the future is holding. And to me, going directly to your question, I think for the future mayor here in New York City and really beyond, with articles about the crime increasing throughout the country, how one can address the issue of crime but at the same time maintain the civil rights and community, and finding that unique balance. To me, that's an extremely important thing to accomplish. The issue of health, I think what the pandemic has done is showed and really, unfortunately, ripped the Band-Aid off as far as the disparities of health issues in the communities of color and what it means. I mean, black communities, Latino communities have suffered tremendously, continue to suffer, and how do we put the ability of our mayor and her or his team in place to address that? And the other key piece to me is business startup and what it means to have small businesses and job training and employment services for communities, especially those communities that have been disconnected for a host of different reasons. You got to put all that together and run the city with the basic day-to-day services of providing the necessary supports for communities from the basic core services that we all desire. So to me, that's the role of the mayor, and I think the mayor also plays a role as far as being cheerleader for the city and making sure that people beyond New York City know that the city is open for business. I mean, as you well know, the tax revenues that are derived from tourism really fund a lot of these programs. So the more tourists we get in, the better the revenue sources are, and the more we can do in New York City to meet the needs of the public itself.
The conversation is with Dennis Walcott, a former deputy mayor under Michael Bloomberg. Mr. Walcott also served as schools chancellor for New York City. You just alluded to this, Mr. Walcott, and you feel very strongly about voter turnout, civic engagement, civic duty, and so on. Now, you had a column, op-ed piece, I believe, earlier this year in the Daily News that noted historic, chronic voter indifference. What exactly does that mean, and what are your expectations heading into Tuesday?
So a couple of things along that line, and thank you for bringing that up. I think that we have a civic duty. I live in Southeast Queens. I know what it means to come out to vote. I remember the first time I voted very clearly. It was at my elementary school that I attended. I remember just about every vote I've taken, both in school boards as well as in the general elections and primaries. Voting to me is so key, and I've seen people die for me to have that right and for all of us to have that right. And I think the responsibility is really on all of us as citizens to exercise that right. And in New York City, starting with the presidential campaign of last year, with the expansion of early voting now and the ability to do that and take time off on weekends to go vote, I think we have a golden opportunity to increase the overall percentage of people that come out. And to me, that's an important point for all of us, no matter what our backgrounds are, and to be educated. So, for example, in my district, in addition to, obviously, the mayor's race, the controller's race, the borough president race here in Queens, we have council races, people running for judgeships, and each of those require a lot of thought. And the Campaign Finance Board and other groups have put out a lot of information on the various candidates who are running. And my wife and I had a lot of conversations, did a lot of research as far as the various candidates, where they stand on issues. And I think that's important for the public to do at large. I talked to some really close colleagues of mine in different fields who are very politically smart. And I asked them, have they voted yet? And they said, nope, they're going to wait for the last debate to take place. And they want to see how that unfolds, which is great because they're waiting for the latest bit of information. Then they'll go out and exercise their right. I know one person that I talked to today, matter of fact, said he's an old-timer in his belief that he's going to go out on voting day, the primary day itself on 22nd of June to vote. So people approach it differently, but no matter how they approach it, they're exercising that right. Sadly, what the op-ed was saying, a lot of people don't exercise that right. And I think that's unfortunate. And I think we have a responsibility to make sure from our ancestors who died and struggled for all of us to have that right, we take advantage of all the opportunities that are available to us to make sure we go out and vote.
We're talking to Dennis Walcott, former New York City deputy mayor, also former schools chancellor. You mentioned this a minute ago, Mr. Walcott. Do people understand, and perhaps this is the million-dollar question, and I'm coming back to the Queens Library System, in which you are the president and CEO in just a minute, but do people understand ranked choice voting, in your opinion?
I think they're getting it more and more and more. And I think people have been out there trying to reinforce what it's about, but it is something totally different. People will have to really focus once they get into that little area to vote because you're ranking those people that you preferred first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And I think people will somewhat be taken aback, but at the same time is all part of the due diligence and our civic responsibility to prepare for that. And so I think it's something that's brand new. It's happening at a critical point in time. But the reality is it is happening. And so if it's happening, then you shouldn't be scared of it. You should become more educated about it. That way you can go out and then do it the correct way. So while I agree, Dominic, that I think a lot of people may not be aware or may not know about it, I think people need to become more familiar with it and then prepare beforehand. And again, I think this is, a side benefit of the early voting. You don't have to go out and vote during the early voting period of time. Just today, I got a ton of mail in, not necessarily just from candidates, but from good government groups talking about ranked choice voting and what it entails and thinking about it. And so, again, I think the material is there to become familiar with as far as ranked choice voting. And I think this is a critical election where people have to go out because, people are saying, this is one of the most critical elections. I think every election is a critical election. This one is different for a host of different reasons. One, in that we have ranked choice voting. Two, it's held in June, so it's held earlier than in the past. And three, we have an open election where, again, I think, 2/3 of the city council seats are open. You have 3 citywide seats that are open. You have council seats that will then select a speaker of the city council. So you have all those dynamics at play. And then the other thing that hasn't gotten a lot of attention is that even though there will be a general election in November and you will have a spirited contest, basically people have been thinking that the Democratic candidate will win. And so you have the potential of 2 governments in place at the same time because the winner of the Democratic primary will have to compete against the winner of the Republican primary. But that person also will be in office, basically without an office, for a 6-month period of time or a 5-month period of time until they are actually sworn in. So it's going to be a fascinating period of time that we have to watch closely.
Former New York City Deputy Mayor Dennis Walcott, who also served as a schools chancellor for New York City. He's now the president and CEO of the Queens Library System. Dominic Carter here with you on Talk Radio 77 WABC. I'll be right back. We are chatting with Dennis Walcott, who is the president and CEO of the Queens Library System. He also served as a deputy mayor under Michael Bloomberg and as schools chancellor of New York City.
These are the Chronicles of Dominic Carter on 77 WABC.
And Mr. Walcott, how do you predict the pandemic will reshape libraries over the long term, as currently you are celebrating your 125th anniversary of the library system?
We are celebrating our 125th anniversary, and, it's really interesting in that, like a lot of institutions, we now have protective glass up, and so the interaction from our staff with our customers may change a little bit, but I see the major change in using both the virtual world in combination with the real world, where people will still be able to come into our building, still be able to sit down, still be able to read books, still be able to take advantage of our computers and our job training services, our adult education services. But I think the services also now will be geared in really addressing the core issues and challenges that we, the city, face and the borough of Queens face. And that's the issue of health disparities, the issue of job training, job readiness, making sure the education support programs are there for our students, and having those types of systems in place where people will be able to take full advantage of that as well. I think you will also see a greater increase in the number of e-books that have been used and e-materials, and so we've increased our e-file, our digital file tremendously over the last year, and I think people will both want the real feel of books, but also the e-materials as well. So I think you'll see a shift in that regard. But then also, I think, as we talked about earlier, Dominic, I think the role of libraries and not being how I grew up, looking at a library or taking advantage of a library. It will be that old way, but merge with both services. And one of the things I didn't talk about was cooling centers and people just to come in and be involved in the community's living room and having that interaction. And the final thing, I think, is that what the pandemic showed, aside from the disparities and the challenges of equity that we are addressing in society, whether it's racial inequities or inequities around health, which also have racial impacts, is the need for us to gather together as one. And we see that at the libraries, where people from different races, immigrant backgrounds, countries of origin, different religions, different sexual persuasions, they don't care. They come into the library for being part of that library ecosystem, and really making sure that they're there as one. And I think that's what you'll continue to see grow stronger and stronger.
We are talking to Dennis Walcott, the president and CEO of the Queens Library System. You had to close down, meaning the Queens Public Library System, March 16th of last year, of 2020. How did the public respond over this last year to your closures?
Well, they definitely wanted us to open and wanted us to be there, but in the beginning especially, they were very understanding that it was just a reality of what we were facing in society. But the pressure is there, and understandably so, for us to be open to the public, open to our youth, providing the services. So the public was both understanding, but also they've now responded with their feet when we continue to expand our services. So, for example, we have various stages that we're involved in right now of opening up our programs. And prior to moving to where people can come in beyond grab and go, we saw maybe like 1,700 people on one particular day. And now that we've expanded where people can come in and use the computers and sit down for a period of time at different libraries, they have grown to like 7,000 per day. And so we see that growth there, with that growth increasing even more so. And to me, that's a positive sign. We've added 50,000 items to our digital collection. We've had 2.1 million items circulated, so books and materials. We've had 400,000 checkouts of physical items during that period of time from March 16th, 2020 to March 16th, 2021. So that doesn't even factor in the last several months as well. We've had, interestingly enough, because people still are able, we didn't turn off our Wi-Fi connections, able to get Wi-Fi connectivity from outside the building and now obviously inside the building. And during that period of time when we were down, we had roughly 500,000 wireless sessions. So people have really taken advantage of us in both our virtual world and now especially since our buildings are back open again.
When do you expect or hope to fully reopen?
Well, I mean, we're following the guidance. As you know, the governor is talking about 70% being the magic mark as far as lifting the variety of restrictions. But we're still going to be very careful because we are a public serving institution. I was on the subway today and people were there wearing their masks. And it was interesting in that, you know, as people walked up to the subway, they didn't have their mask on, but they had their mask out as they're going down the steps. And we expect that same type of system in place where we're going to ask people to continue to wear masks, and then we'll be making a determination over a period of time. So the public will see us more and more in our opening process over the next several weeks and then the next couple of months, and hopefully by the start of school, we'll be having all the branches that are available open for service to the public. I mean, we have some branches that are under construction, some, as I indicated, that are either vaccine centers. All of our testing sites in conjunction with the city have now shut down, so we'll be transitioning those back into libraries as well. So we'll be gradually putting our libraries back online.
We are chatting with the president and CEO of the Queens Library System, a former deputy mayor of New York City, Dennis Walcott, also former schools chancellor. I'm wrapping up, Mr. Walcott. We're still in budget season. The executive budget the mayor recently announced would cut the three library systems by $10 million, including a $2.9 million cut to the Queens Public Library System. What will that mean?
It will have a drastic impact on not just the Queens Public Library System, but Brooklyn and New York library systems as well. It may mean us either shaving our hours down, not being able to purchase the amount of material that our public is used to us having, and we will have to make some potentially drastic cuts. And we're confident that the mayor and the city council will restore the budget because the mayor has been good to the libraries. The city council has been great to the libraries. Our borough president has been fantastic to the Queens Public Library. But we are really dependent on those dollars coming to allow us to maintain the programmatic services that we had as well as the hours that we had prior to the pandemic. And if they don't and not restored, then we're going to have to make some drastic adjustments to hours of service and the amount of material we purchase and staffing patterns. So we have to be very careful about potential impact of any budget cut on the Queens as well as Brooklyn and New York public library systems.
Mr. Walcott, I close this way. What should the next mayor know about the value of libraries in our recovery?
Libraries are truly the open democratic institution for the public. I mean, people can walk in at any point in time and get the service. And as we move out of a pandemic mode and into a more open society, that open society means that libraries truly will be there as an open democratic institution. And also the adaptability of libraries as well, because as I indicated earlier, whether it's with vaccine sites, whether it's with cooling centers, whether it's polling sites, whether it's testing sites for COVID. We, the libraries, have been there for New York City and will continue to be there. And that's separate and part of our normal day-to-day operation of providing programs, books, and materials and services to the general public. So we are an institution that's not going anywhere, that's here to serve the public and to serve the public for free.
Former Deputy Mayor Dennis Walcott, the president and CEO of the Queens Library System.